Okay. Everyone, my name is Larry Trotter. I'm the founder of Inherent Security, and my company specializes in health tech cybersecurity. Today, I'm joined with Chris Yoko. He is the founder of Yoko Co. His company does a lot of web development, and we're essentially going to go through a case study. Chris brought me in to help his company with HIPAA compliance. So, what better way to start off is to let Chris introduce himself.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, so my name's Chris Yoko, as you said, founder of Yoko Co. And we do what we call is website design development and web application design and development for organizations that have a passion or purpose beyond just profit. So if organizations want to have a larger impact on the world, the website is usually the largest lever somebody has to pull on, and that's the thing we help people make the most of.
Well, great. So, Chris, you brought me on, of course, to help you out with HIPAA compliance. So, can you tell everyone a little bit about the challenges that you were facing prior to bringing us on?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like anyone going through the HIPAA stuff is like, oh, I know exactly. There's a lot
Right.
of challenges. So yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of the work we do and a lot of the organizations we support are people who are focused on healthcare and helping to make lives better in one capacity or another for patients. One of the things we can do to help elevate those organizations and help them make the most of their web presence is to help create a continuity or continuum of care so that people have a more seamless and structured interaction with the healthcare organizations they work with. A lot of the organizations they work with, it's very pocketed or granular in terms of like the interactions you have. You see this practitioner for this one thing, and that doesn't connect to the other specialist you see unless they're specifically talking to each other, and it can be a real hassle.
Yeah.
Everyone, yeah, shakes their head or nods the
Huge
exact same
hassle in
way.
healthcare. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so a couple of our clients were looking to us to help build systems to help integrate that and make that a more seamless experience for the patients are the end winners, but the organization also benefits because now they got to see a much wider perspective of their patients and they can go, well, we've been helping you in this capacity, but stress can be a huge, negative impact on health. And we see you were talking to this person and you shared that you have a lot of high stress. And this is a thing that patients could opt into. And a lot of patients want to have, the specialists who are trying to help them be more aware of their life and the ways that they can help and be more proactive, especially in a healthcare system that tends to be predicated on fixing things that are broken, getting into more of the kind of preventative side of medicine
Right.
is something I think a lot of people are looking forward to. So I say all that to basically preface, we were starting to explore what it would look like to provide clients with a HIPAA, I say certified or compliant environment. I know there's not like a rubber stamp that truly says like, great, you are now certified by OCR, whoever it might be, that this is HIPAA compliant, kind of an ongoing and evolving challenge. But making sure that we had our foundation in place, we wanted to make sure that we were able to provide robust security, that we're going to be protecting this information. We didn't want to be, I think it's almost taken for granted now of like, what was the exploit of the week where, some big
Right.
company says like, oh, this one, like, whenever like the credit companies are like, yep, we lost our information. Here's $2.50 in a year of free credit monitoring. Like everyone starts to roll their eyes. The clients we work with, are really mindful of the relationships they have with their patients and they want this information to stay absolutely secure. And so obviously, we knew about being able to provide some levels of online security and protection encryption, but whenever it got into the weeds of HIPAA compliance, that's where we started to feel really lost. And so thankfully, was really glad to be introduced to you and have you kind of help lead us through what is I think very overwhelming and confusing process, especially for somebody who's sitting in my seat, because you almost don't really know where to begin. And there's a lot of noise online. Like if you try to research this on your own, it can be a really confusing landscape. And so I was just really helpful to have, some of your tutelage and guidance to help us through that process.
No, yeah, I really appreciate that. And you're right. Even, myself, just spending the amount of time, the years I have to actually navigate and dig through the weeds myself. I mean, if you go to HHS's website, it's buried all like in different
Absolutely.
places. So it could be like a nightmare to try to actually, figure out what you actually have to do. And, even if it's something that, if I'm trying to, let's say, I don't, but I'm building a server, whatever I'm trying to figure out, and if I'm trying to piece together information online, it can be very challenging. So when you're dealing with the regulation, you're spot on. It's, even more complex. So, before you brought us on, I know you talked a little bit, said you know a little bit about some of the security things to do, encryption, et cetera, et cetera. But what challenges were you facing before you brought us in to help out?
Yeah, I think it was really, there were probably like 3 or 4 levels I think you could break it into. So The first two are like kind of the regulatory side, like just navigating regulation in general is, I don't think, a thing anybody wants to do for the first time when they can have experience, someone who already has that experience to guide them through it.
Right.
So being able to gain from that guidance. The second one was more of like a legal lens where it's like, okay, yes, you have the HIPAA compliance structure, but then you also have these business associate agreements with all the other
Mm.
organizations and trying to figure out like how much of that is, negotiable, how much of that is fundamental, like where do you draw those lines? How do you make sure that whenever you're entering into a partnership, especially we're the smaller link in a lot of these chains with the organizations that we support. We don't want to be the weak link, but we also want to make sure that we're not taking on an unfair amount of risk or liability on behalf of our clients. And so trying to figure out where, kind of a fair balance point is in those conversations was really, really helpful. And then you start to get into the nitty gritty side of things. And the two sides of that is, of course, your actual cybersecurity components. So what are you doing in terms of the system itself to keep it protected? And then the people oriented side of security, the policies and procedures you have to make sure that, your soft targets, so to speak, aren't the weak points either. And so
Yeah.
there's kind of each of those four areas is things that we thought we'd really benefit from. And we had strived to do what we could to kind of learn in each of those areas and felt
Mhm.
very comfortable in some and very, very alienated in others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch a little bit about the business associates because it's agreements because a lot of companies, especially like health tech, right? You're using a cloud provider and you're essentially just downloading their business associate agreement, but you're not negotiating with Amazon.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
so it can really get overlooked when there's actually, an entity that, hospital, clinic, whatever, they're sending you a business associate agreement. And you really have to comb through that agreement and look at some of these specifications. And you're right, understanding what's negotiable, what can be negotiated, how far can you push back those types of things. And that's really important because if you blindly sign one of those things,
Oh, yeah.
right, you can catch yourself in a lot of, different issues down the
Oh,
line.
for sure. And I mean, to remember that it's like, and it's not out of malice, but the organizations who, like the law firms that draft those things,
Right.
want them to be super heavily in favor of their client. Because if something goes wrong, somebody goes back to the lawyer and they're like, well, why didn't you draft a better agreement? So, I mean, those things are always, as you kind of helped point out, super heavy handed early in the process. And so knowing that that was, because when we first went, we were just like, oh, this is just a thing we have to either take or leave. And to know like, oh no, this is a conversation you can have was, yeah, really, really eye opening.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad. We were helpful within that. So, can you explain to everybody a little bit about the process, how we work together, how we helped you out with HIPAA compliance, so they know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the process was pretty straightforward. It obviously started with more of kind of an audit and deep dive with you getting, an idea of what our landscape looks like, both in terms of like the system engineering and technology itself, as well as kind of the lay of the land with, our people, our processes, procedures, what things did we already have in place? And you were helping us kind of map to some existing frameworks, try to figure out like, okay, what things are we lacking? And then the thing that I really liked about the way that you structure those conversations is it's structured enough that you kind of know where you're at and where you're going. So you can kind of see the path and be prepared, but it's also accessible enough because you seem to guide all those things and your team works through conversations as opposed to, I don't know, a lot of people I've worked with in the security arena are tend to be like, yep, fill out this checklist and then do this. And it's very like dry. It's very rarely like meeting you where you are. And so I
Hmm.
really appreciated how you were willing to kind of meet us where we are, understand what that gap looks like between where we're currently at and where we wanted to get to, and then what the future holds, and help us kind of build a more comprehensive plan to say, okay, like let's do this in a pacing that makes sense for you. Here's what is achievable now. Here are the things that we should do immediately. Here's what's achievable over maybe the next 12 months. And then here's what over the horizon you guys should be considering long term, and how that was informed and updated as we went through each step of the process.
I'm glad, you really found that helpful because, one of the things we pride ourselves on is making the experience efficient for you. Just something personal for me is I love this stuff. So I always try to educate as much as possible. If you're willing to accept that, I'll talk about it and get in the weeds with you. But if you don't, that's good too. But yeah, just to know that you felt good through the process, it was efficient for you. Makes me feel good as
Yeah,
well
absolutely.
too. How would you described it a little bit? Could you just go a little bit more in detail on how, what we might have done that's different than other security firms?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that I liked about our approach or the approach we worked on together was one, like I said, it was very conversational. Two, you guys came in with having done a lot of the homework. So like you'd said, like, hey, here's some stuff we want to know for our meeting. We sent stuff over and you guys had actually read it. A lot of organizations I've worked with, it's like the meeting is a forcing function for them to open the stuff that you sent over,
Mhm.
which is frustrating and can feel like people aren't valuing your time whenever you have to go through that process. And then the way that you were willing to interact with a lot of our different stakeholders. So, in our project team, we've got engineers, we've got HR folks, we've got people who are different parts of this process. And the fact that it wasn't just everything has to be, streamlined through one person was really useful because while obviously having a primary project stakeholder or point of contact makes a lot of sense. Being open to getting the perspective from these people who are contributing to, but not necessarily all security oriented, I think was really impactful in making sure that we had kind of the most robust and most well-rounded approach. Whereas at least in the past, a lot of the folks that I've worked with, it's been really kind of taciturn, like, hey, here's a form. Here's what I need you to complete. And anytime we ask, hey, are you willing to talk to this part of our team or that part of our team? Hey, if you want them to say something, they can chime in on the email or they can open a ticket. And it's just a very like dehumanizing process.
Right.
And well, again, I understand the need for it in some businesses. It isn't one that I feel like was going to get us where we needed to go. So being able to have more of an actual relationship to build on felt a lot more conducive to getting to an actual endpoint.
And I'm glad you felt good about that as well too, because it's essentially cybersecurity is a culture shift.
For
So,
sure.
getting as many different departments involved as possible is the, best way to go about security. You're working with different workflows again, and this is something you're pushing out, throughout the whole entire organization. One of the biggest challenges where a lot of companies and industries fall is when they leave it to one department to do everything when it comes to security, and they just kind of hope everyone else is going to fall in place, and that's one of the challenges because it's a cultural shift. So, what would you say about the? How did you feel about the results? How would you describe the results after we helped you with HIPAA compliance?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You kind of brought up what I think was one of the biggest wins, which is the awareness and the conversation around it. Because
Hmm.
it is one of those things where, especially if you're an organization where I wouldn't say we're holacratic, like we're not a super flat organization, but we're not a huge team and there's not a ton of hierarchy. And we give a lot of our team members a lot of trust and a lot of leeway to do their jobs the way they feel is best given whatever their objective is. And being able to have that conversation in a way that feels less restrictive and less limiting. Like obviously, once you start to put cybersecurity into a really serious place, like yes, you do have to kind of lock some things down and you do have to be intentional about certain approaches. What I really liked about the results of our work together is it was not a like we must snuff out the candle of thought type of security. Like it's not a wet blanket approach. It was very much like a, hey, I see why you're doing some of the things the way you're doing them. And here's a better way to do it so that you can continue to be creative, but within, I don't even want to say confines, like it wasn't too limiting, but it was with more of a security mindset or more awareness around what the risk factors are. So that when people are being creative and coming up with solutions, they are being mindful of the risk that it might also pose to our cybersecurity posture. And so that enabled people to not feel like it was somebody pushing them into a corner and saying no, but enables them to basically see that, okay, like I understand why we're doing these things. It's important information to protect. And with all of that, here are some ways for us still to achieve the same ends that we've been, aiming to achieve.
Great. And who would you recommend us to?
I mean, I think so, obviously for a shop like ours where you're beginning to jump into some new security initiative, I think it's a no-brainer. You're just the wisdom and the stuff that you've learned through your career that I could have spent a week researching and you answered in less than 2 minutes, I think is a worthwhile return on investment right there. So jumping into any new, security plateau, going for any of those certifications. Obviously, there's a ton of them out there. We jumped in for HIPAA, but as a part of our conversation, you talked a lot about, what people need for SOC compliance. I know a lot of people go for like ISO and all of those things. So obviously, if you're jumping into something new, I think being able to benefit from what the inherent team brings is really beneficial. The other side would be if you feel like this is maybe like a thing you've been putting off for too long and you continue to hear the news stories and I don't know. I know a lot of business owners who are kind of like ostrich, like, I got enough fires to put out. I don't want to have to worry about another one. And so they're going to just kind of bury their head in the sand.
Right.
You will spend significantly less time working on this proactively than you will reactively. So, like, if you have an opportunity to say, let's carve out a couple weeks and do this now, you'll save yourself countless hours from being forced to do it after something terrible has happened, and you'll feel much better for it. So, I mean, those two scenarios, like, specifically, I would say it's a no-brainer.
I appreciate that. And can you just tell everybody a little bit about, again, who's your ideal client? Who do you like working with?
Yeah, I mean, the folks we love to work with are those who are kind of geared and predicated towards impact. So that looks like a lot of different organizations. I mean, we're obviously talking a lot today about HIPAA stuff. So healthcare organizations, medical practices, medicines, I should say, like pharmaceutical organizations, we work with a lot of those. But we also work with a lot of associations who help bring together either industries or members within industries to continue to advance, progress in a lot of different dimensions. We work with a lot of different associations, and I always think it's fascinating to get a sneak behind the curtain of all these different worlds. We get to work with a lot of really effective nonprofits, and then of course we work with a lot of kind of professional service firms and technology organizations. So that can look like, SaaS tech, or we do work with a lot of folks in the AI space as well. And a lot of those organizations, they see the ability to transform the world in these different capacities, some on a very large scale, some on a more local and more intentional scale. But nonetheless, they have this intention to help make the world a better place, and we help them use their website to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate you for sharing that. And, with the work that you do and just working with you, I can already tell that you're going to make the world a better place too. And I really mean that. So, best of luck in your endeavors. I'm glad you guys feel good about what we were able to help you out with as far as the HIPAA and cybersecurity is concerned. Definitely look forward to working with you in the future. And again, I appreciate you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about it. And if people have questions or just want to get a third party opinion about, the situation they're in and if it'd be a good fit, also happy to chat with them.
Thanks, Chris.
You got it, man.